Welcome to one of my favorite subjects in all of photography in total, sharpening. I'm going to tell you why you need it, how to use it, and I'll probably add a little layer of why you've never heard this before. I don't see anyone getting it right. I was asked to write the first chapter of a book on photography. The first chapter was called Digital Photography, because of this formula I'm going to share with you today. Now, formula, that sounds awfully scary. There's a lot of math. I'm going to show you the math. I'm not going to scare you with the math. I'm going to tell you, however, what you need to know. Oh, it's really simple so that you can get your sharpness correct. Now, what I'm about to tell you about sharpening matters in your camera. It matters in Adobe Camera Raw. It matters in Lightroom. It matters in Photoshop. Although I'm giving it to you today from an Adobe Camera Raw point of view. Sharpening. The greatest lack, really, honestly, that I see with amateurish photos is that they just aren't sharp enough. You think they're sharp because they're in focus, but no, you need to add a layer of sharpness. The pros know this. The pros don't know how to do this effectively. The pros scare themselves out of doing it fully because they don't know the formula, but you're going to learn that today. Lots of cameras automatically unsharpen as they take the photo, because most camera technology, DSLRs specifically, are fearful that you're going to see the jaggies, the pixels on the edges of the images, and so there's what is called an anti-aliasing filter applied to your camera. Anti-aliasing. What that means is you took a sharp photo and now I'm going to blur it so you don't get caught. It defeats the purpose of sharpening. Now, the Nikon D810, which I purchased, removed anti-aliasing. That's why I bought it, actually. It was a new camera. It had great quality, but it removed this anti-aliasing. Why? Because I know sharpening. I want to do my own sharpening. So every photo you take has to be sharpened in post-processing to compensate for the anti-aliasing of your camera, the anti-jagging edge of your camera. You need it. You'll love the results. All right? In Photoshop, I'll just show you, they use the wrong word. It's like they're trying to lose you. You will see. In Photoshop, the very best sharpener is under the filter menu, sharpen, and then there's a pull out. I'm going to show you the pull out, and I want you to tell me which one you would definitely not use. Which filter, sharpen, would you definitely not use if you were trying to sharpen an image? Would it be sharpen, sharpen edges, sharpen more, smart sharpen, or unsharp mask? Which one would you not use? I think it would be this one. Okay, welcome to the world of Adobe. This is the proper one to use. What? No one would figure that out on their own. Unsharp mask is the best sharpener once you learn the formula. It comes from an old way that it was described. It's an old film days fix that would sharpen. They would use a blurry duplicate of a photo as a negative, lay it on the image when they would shoot the print. Those blurry edges would add a little extra light around the original image, creating the illusion, and that's key, of sharpness. Sharpness is an illusion. I'm going to quit Photoshop. Now, the illusion, that's the important thing. There are 3 places where this particular formula has affected you day in and day out. Most of your life, but certainly these days, every day of your life. This particular illusion, let me explain. There's an illusion that you see every day in the world of printing. And since I told you my day job is a consultant in the print industry, photo industry, graphic design, and illustration industry, I have some sense of how this formula plays out in three distinct technologies. One, printing. Two, screen or display technology, like your computer screen. And three, sharpening. The same formula affects us all. Printing is an illusion. Maybe you know this, but I just think it's fascinating. When you look at a printed image, and I'm just simulating that here on my screen. When you look at a printed image on paper, it looks like there may be many multiple colors, but there aren't. There are only 4 colors. In fact, there are only 3 colors of ink plus black, which isn't really a color. So the 3 colors in printing are the complements of red, green, and blue. The complements are cyan, magenta, and yellow. And they're tiny little dots. They're tiny little dots of cyan and magenta and yellow. And if those little dots are tiny enough, past a very particular visual threshold, then you, the viewer, don't see the dots. Instead, you see the illusion created by the dots. That you don't want to see the dots. No, no, no. I want to see the illusion created by the dots. Now, you don't need to know any of this, but cyan dots are rotated at 15 degrees, and magenta dots are 75 degrees, and yellow dots are usually 0, and so on. We don't care. Just let me look at the photo, please. That is typical for printing. Here's the key, the key, the key. I don't want to get caught. I don't want to get caught. I want to print, let's say, an image and create the illusion of smooth, continuous tone photography. But in order to print it, I have to print it in only 3 colors plus black. So we need an illusion. Some brilliant genius thought of that 100 plus years ago. Incredible, incredible. I marvel. Now, a second set of geniuses. Let me just go ahead and give you the formula. There's something called the viewing distance formula. And if you're interested in the viewing distance formula, just tell me that you want the handout on the viewing distance formula. I promise I'll send it to you. It looks very mathy. There's a viewing distance formula. Now let me tell you what we're doing, okay? Take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. This isn't hard, but I'm going to give you the magic number. The magic number. Human beings can detect an object. They can discern an object visually if that object is larger than 1/200th of an inch. If the object is less than 1/200th of an inch, they can't discern the object, and instead what happens is they'll be fooled by the illusion created by such an object. The average human eye at typical viewing distance can detect an object greater than 1/200th of an inch. 1/200th. 1/200th. That's important. Now we can test this. In fact, I've told you just now that it affects the printing world. You saw that. If those tiny printing dots are less than 1/200th of an inch, I see the illusion created by dots, but not the dots. The second place this affects us every day is display technology, your screen. Now, display scientists, display technicians understand this technique. In fact, Apple have actually given it a special name. Now, all display companies do this, but Apple have actually given it a trademark name called the Retina display. This technology based on this formula. There's a viewing distance. I'm sitting here in front of my computer. You could do the same thing. If you were to sit in front of your computer as if you were working, getting things done, and I have a ruler in my hand, and I want to just see, as I'm sitting here, how far is my eyeball from the display? Well, magic, 17 inches. When I say the average human eye and an average viewing distance, I'm talking about 17 inches on a display. The average human eye, now I'm not talking about small children with extremely sharp vision. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the average viewer. The average viewer can detect an image greater than 1/200th of an inch at a viewing distance of about 17 inches. That's math. That's math. And so, let me open my calculator just to explain. If I take, and this is the geeky part, there's a magic number, and if you're interested where this number comes from, I will share with you, this is geeky, I will share with you the math. The math, I'll send it to you if you want, or you can take a screenshot if you want, but when you do all the math, you get a value, 3438. Very simply, look at the bottom, very simply. What pixels per inch do I need, you'll see, at a particular viewing distance? I'm going to do it. 3438, that number never changes. Divided by 17 inches. 3438 divided by 17 inches, and I get around 200. 1/200th of an inch is the amount of resolution required, no less. That's the amount of resolution required. It could be more, but that's the threshold to create the illusion and not get caught. All right? Now, hang on a minute. I'm going to send you a text. Did you see what I just did? I picked up my phone and I held it a whole lot closer to my face, as everyone does, than to my computer display. Well, that just changed the viewing distance. And Apple have calculated all of this. A computer display, a Retina display, requires only 200 pixels per inch, light bulbs per inch. But a cell phone requires much more. A Retina display on an iPhone is about 360. It depends on the distance. It depends on the distance. 3438 divided by, I don't know what distance this is, 8 inches? Ooh, that would require 429 pixels. Light bulbs on my little display. Now, I happened to go online and do a little research on the math, and Apple actually are using 458 pixels per inch on the new 13-inch iPhone. This is how they come up with that value. What distance will your viewer be viewing? Start with 3438, divide it by that distance, and that's how many pixels per inch you will need. It affects the size of printing dots. It affects the size of display pixels. It affects our sharpening. Third and final spot, that is just a rewind into what we will be learning about sharpening. And so sharpening is the third of those three. Printing display technology, and sharpening. Let's have a little test. I'm going to open a test image. I've created it. It's not a photograph, but I'm going to open it in Adobe Camera Raw just so that we can play with the sharpening commands. Now, we're going to go to a panel in Adobe Camera Raw called Detail. It's the third panel. Therefore, Command 3 or Control 3 will take me right to it. But that's where we find the sharpening command. I gave you all of this intro in order to explain to you why I'm going to suggest you put these values into your sharpening panel. I've gone online, I've researched what other people are saying about sharpening, and I've thrown it all out because they don't consider the formula. It's so important. Even Adobe's own video explaining the sharpening command is incorrect. They say set your sharpening in Photoshop to 100 and your radius at 1. I'm telling you, you try that and you're going to have a really horrible example, and therefore you don't like it and you'll never use sharpening. Here we go. Sharpen to the max. I'm going to suggest you sharpen to the max. That is not the problem we have with sharpening. The problem we all have with sharpening, Photoshop, Lightroom, Adobe Camera Raw, is not the sharpen amount, rather it's the radius of the sharpen slices. Now I'm going to zoom in and let you see. When you play with sharpening, it actually digs a little trough of light or dark wherever pixels of similar tonality clash with other pixels of non-similar tonality. What do I mean? Hey, a bunch of pixels here were black and they collided with a bunch of pixels over here that were gray. And so sharpening creates the illusion of sharpness by drawing these little lighted or darkened troughs where those collisions occur. That's what sharpening does. You can see where black hit gray, I'm seeing it drew a bright trough. But where gray hit white, it drew a dark trough. And where black hit white, it drew no trough. This is what the sharpening technology is actually doing. Drawing these little trenches or troughs of light or darkness to create the illusion. Now, what happens if those troughs are too big? What happens if those troughs are greater than a 200th of an inch? I get caught. I see the troughs rather than the illusion of sharpness created. The whole key to all of sharpening is to make sure that that radius is no greater than 1/200th of an inch. How is it done? Let's jump to it. At the very bottom of your Adobe Camera Raw screen, there is that it looks like a little hyperlink on the internet. And that is our workflow setup. Look at the resolution. It could be anything, but whatever it is, and by default it's 300, look at the resolution and copy it or remember it. 300 pixels per inch is what this image currently has. Now, I'm going to cancel out of that, get back out to my calculator. Let's paste what I copied or remember it and type it 300. That's how many pixels per inch that photograph currently is set to if I were to open it in Photoshop. Here's the math. So simple. The radius in Photoshop, Lightroom, or Bridge Camera Raw should be whatever the image resolution is divided by 200. And that is what the radius needs to be so I don't get caught. catch that? If my radius was set, if my resolution was set, if I changed it in the default for the workflow, if my default was now 300 pixels per inch, I would divide that by the magic number 200. And my trough, my radius, needs to be 1.8. And then I can crank the volume on my sharpness without getting caught. We're going back in. Here's what you need to know. All the math, all the formulas. I'm just explaining why I'm telling you what I'm telling you. Why I got to write chapter 1 of the book on digital photography. Because of this formula, I gleaned this from the print consulting. I read about it on display technology. It makes sense. Of course, that's the number. But it affects sharpening exactly as much. Sharpen all the way so I can get to my radius. 1.5 is what I'm typing. Why? Because down in the workflow settings, my value is set to 300. 300 divided by 200 always is your radius. If you change that resolution to 360, you're going to have to change your radius value, right? 360 divided by 200, 1.8. If the value is 200, what's 200 divided by 200? It's 1. Your radius would be 1. That's how it works. You don't have to change this resolution value ever. Just leave it where it is. Then that makes the math simple. It's 1.5. 1.5. Let's zoom in. And yes, sure enough, I see, maybe you can, as I zoom in, you can see the troughs created. Illusion of sharpness will occur. Now, there are two other sliders here under sharpen and radius. One is detail. I dislike it greatly. It's not in Photoshop, even though masking is. Time out. In Photoshop, under unsharp mask, the filter unsharp mask, sharpen, radius, and masking occur, but they don't call it masking in Photoshop. They call it threshold. It's the same. Only in Adobe Camera Raw have they added an extra slider, which I don't care much for, detail. It can really uglify your image. You get caught. Things look too crunchy, too crisp. So I don't dial that up, if at all. It's very, very tiny. 5, 3, something small, if at all. Now masking or threshold in the unsharp mask filter in Photoshop. Masking says take everything I just did and undo it. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Undo it in specific locales. Undo it where pixels are already very similar. For example, where there's grain or where there's noise. Don't sharpen my noise. Flesh tones. Get a good look. The flesh is all not one exact shade of flesh. There are dark pores and bright spots, and if I sharpen, it's going to sharpen the pores. That's not generally looked upon as a good thing. It's frowned upon, in fact. And so, if you set your masking to 5 to 10, you'll find that it will turn off. It won't sharpen areas that are already very similar to each other to begin with. But where my flesh touches a dark collision of dark pixels, right? Flesh to eyebrow or flesh to glasses, sharpening will occur. The masking doesn't turn those off because they're already so different. They're very different, so the sharpness occurs. That's how that works. What do you want to know? Bottom line. Bottom line. Pretend you didn't learn anything yet. Open Adobe Camera Raw. click on that hyperlink at the bottom. Make sure your resolution under workflow is set to 300. Then go to your detail panel. Crank your sharpness up to the max, which is 150. Type 1.5 here in radius. It's 300 divided by 200, the magic number. I've got my detail set at 5, my masking set at 10. You're done. Now what you could do is save this as a preset. We learned this in the main lesson. And I could just call it Sharpen Correctly. What am I going to do? Profile? No. Basic? No. Curve? No. Detail? Yes. Nothing else. It's just my sharpener. Twist it. I did my sharpening. I didn't do luminance noise reduction or color noise reduction. This is simply This is simply going to save my sharpening settings as a preset. All right? I'm going to do that. I now have a preset. We already learned about this under my user presets called Sharpen Correctly, but I might want to put a star by it. And then I can run this preset on anything I want. If I were you, I'd take it a step further. Hear me carefully. Go take a photo, one photo of anything. Grab your camera, take one photo. Import that photo into Adobe Camera Raw and don't do anything else to it. But change the sharpening values. Save that preset. And here's the big finish, the grand finale. Then go down to that hyperlink. And now you can click on Raw Defaults. And you could choose that new preset from User Presets or Favorites, because you put a star by it, Sharpen Correctly. And now listen to me, automatically every photo you ever open in Adobe Camera Raw, the sharpness is done. That becomes your global raw default automatically. That's it. That's how you set a raw default. You build a preference with whatever you want in it. We want sharpening correctly in it. Automatically do that. I will never have to sharpen manually again, not even with the preset. It's automatically being applied. Fantastic. Now I'm going to cancel because I've already got that built in. Preset set, and it's chosen. I'm going to show you one more thing. You're done, by the way. You're done. You're done. You don't need me. But if I go back to the detail panel, I just want to show you a little trick if you're interested, if you want to have a little fun with it. Sharpen. That slider gets set, but then after that slider, the next three sliders have a little magic trick. On the PC, hold the Alt key. On the Mac, hold the Option key. And when you drag the slider, it tries to show you in stark black and white and gray, no matter your image, what the troughs look like. If you care, I'm just dialing it up and down. You can actually see the troughs with the Option or the Alt key down at any value. If you care. Now, detail. Dink. Same thing. Option or Alt click, and I can see the detail slider and its effect on the image. Masking. Areas of white are where it's going to do the above, and areas of black is where it's going to skip. And I can drag that, and you can see it's even skipping the grays on the inside, the grain on the inside there of that middle, right? But I can play out here. It's going to sharpen even the grain, anything areas of white, But if I keep pushing, you can see it just drops out. Only my edges. That you can see how those things interact. If I opened an image that actually had some grain in it, watch the following. Drag, Option or Alt, click and drag the radius slider, and you see that it's even putting little troughs around my grain if I go too far with the radius. The detail is going to kill me. It puts two troughs, one on the outside of every collision and one on the inside, which is what's resulting in that super crunchy look I don't prefer. Masking. Where will you turn it off? Areas of black, I'm continuing to drag with the Alt or Option key, is where it will turn it off. I can never quite turn it all off once I've turned on detail, by the way. Just a little trick if you want to have a little fun and see what it does. I'm going to cancel that. Let's take an image, a real image, not a sample image. We're going to sharpen a real photo. While that's loading, let me ask you or tell you, there are 2, 3 maybe kinds of sharpening realms, sharpening needs. Input sharpening and output sharpening. Input sharpening is what needs to happen when a photo's photons are captured, when it comes in to either the camera or into the post-processing editor. It's sharpening that must occur either on the camera or here in post-processing. That's input sharpening. So what I've been discussing is input sharpening. Here's what I'm going to tell you. If you have sharpening turned on your camera, turn it off. I saw an article from a very good website, slrlounge.com, that claimed that you ought to turn on the sharpening if you shoot RAW files, and you ought to turn it off if you shoot JPEG files. That's wrong. They're wrong, because where you turn it on in your picture profile doesn't even affect RAW files. I don't know what they're doing. They're thinking they're doing something. They've been doing nothing this whole time. It doesn't affect it. Turn it off if it's in your camera. Let's do it to our RAW files here automatically when they open up. Let it happen. Let it occur. Now, I just opened the image of the great Brian Peterson, and look at the detail slider. I didn't do that. It's automatic. It's in my RAW default. It automatically did 150 and 1.5 for the radius, and you know why. Detail of 3, masking of 5, that's my preference on my camera. So it's those first two that really matter. If I set my masking to something other than 0, it keeps my skies, my nice, smooth, nuanced gradations in a sky, it keeps them from banding. I don't want to sharpen those things. I don't want to sharpen this background that's nice and smooth. Sharpen the edges of things. Where eyes meet eyebrows or flesh, things like that. Things I want to sharpen. Now this is just my starting point, the detail panel. The detail panel is your starting point. If you grab a local brush or gradient, whatever you set in the sliders for clarity or sharpness, utilize those settings from the detail slider. So you got to get those right, or even your detail and clarity sliders are wrong. Your sharpness and clarity sliders will be wrong. Get them right. Get them right. Set that detail panel. Now, in slider world, clarity only runs sharpness on middle tones. Sharpness runs sharpness on dark colliding with bright edges. So where there's very white and very dark, or very close to those two, very brights, very darks, it adds an extra layer of sharpening. That's usually not great. But the mid-tone sharpening is excellent and well worth doing. Now, it's already been done because of my detail slider, but I could dial my clarity slider up and sneak out and make, oh, I got a little too much going on. I've got some brightness dialed into that too. I just want to do clarity, and that is just going to super sharpen the details, the hair, the pores in his image. I'm super sharpening with a paintbrush. Before and after. There's after. There's before. After. Before. After. You see, it's a super sharpener, particularly on the midtones. But if I do it also, not just on the midtones, but also run the sharpener, it'll start to, oh yeah, where the hairs are hitting that dark shadow in this hairline, then it super cranks that too. That's usually not as good. Dialing it back. So now it's going to do the flesh, but not those dark to light hair values, because I've dialed the sharpening value down. Bottom line, these sliders rely on your detail panel. Now, I don't have, I'm going to reset, Command Option R, Control Alt R, I'm resetting. I don't have a men, listen, I'm sorry. Please don't think me sexist. I'm just telling you the truth. When I have a woman's photo, I've never met one woman who enjoys me sharpening all the details. I'm just saying it's the truth. I don't get paid if I do that. I'm telling you the truth. Men, on the other hand, for some reason, don't mind it if the scars show up, the pores, the whiskers, they don't mind. It makes them look tough and rugged. Don't shoot me. I'm just telling you what my reality looks like, okay? If it's a female, don't shoot me. If it's a female, I do not clarify. I don't run clarity. I don't run sharpness at a high value. Instead, I'll dial the clarity down, the sharpness down. Now I'm going to introduce you to a new slider, newish. It hasn't been there since the life of Adobe Camera Raw, but texture. And texture is a good noise remover or further detail enhancer. It's very closely related to clarity. I think clarity and texture go together. There may be times when you want to pull them separately, but generally they'll go together. So I'm going to dial texture down also. Check it out. Texture, clarity, and sharpness. Those are the three major dials that I have to play with. If it's a female and you want to smooth out skin, now how do I know that at least many females like not to clarify those details? Because they buy makeup, they run concealer, and all these words my wife has taught me. I don't know. Now I'm looking at her face is way too sharp, but you've learned if you hold the Alt key or the Option key, you can turn it off where you want to. I've turned it off on the eyes and maybe the lips and maybe even the hairline. I'd like to see a nice crisp hairline, maybe even a chin. P. Preview. What have I done? I've smoothed skin by dialing those three sliders down, texture, clarity, and sharpness in some combination after I've set my detail panel, which never changes for me. Now, That brush I just used with those sliders dialed in that way, could I save that as a preset? Yes, but not a global preset. It was a local preset. And so up to my brushes, and I'm going to save that as a local adjustment preset for my future. Save it. I have. And I called it feminine, less texture, or feminine in general. What's the difference? I've got a feminine setting. I have a feminine setting that also cranks the texture down a little bit more for certain skin types. And I've added a little bit of contrast to it, you can see, and a little tinge of brightness. But I've also saved a version of it that doesn't do that. It just does the sharpening, but no brighter. You've got these if you've asked for my presets. Feminine, feminist with even less texture, and feminine, but don't brighten it. You've got it. That's where those three came from. I had to explain to you the sharpness values so that you can make sense of those on your own. But you can see how it's actually played out in two ways for me in Adobe Camera Raw. Number one, the global preset for detail, it's global. Set it, save a preset. This is review. Go to your workflow. Raw defaults is what I should say. The workflow panel by clicking the bottom. Raw defaults. Pick that preset that included your sharpness. Be careful. Make sure it only includes your sharpness, not your black and whiteness. Right? You don't want to turn all your images into black and whites. So that's why you want to take one photo, edit its sharpening, save its preset, load that preset as your default. Now there are some other things we can add to our default later, but for now you'll want that for sure. I said okay. The other place it affects me, not just my defaults, my raw defaults, but when I save a local brush setting. A local brush, I showed it to you, we're reviewing. I changed my sliders. And I saved that adjustment preset as a new one with a new name. Now, what do you think this does? More clarity. What do you think it does? You got it. It just dials my clarity slider up for me. What do you think more clarity, slight brightness does? You got it. And so on. So an understanding of how sharpness works and the sliders work will allow you to start to create your own custom brushes. That is it. It's a big deal, sharpening. Get it right and you look like a hero. Get it wrong and you look like an amateur. I don't sharpen everything equally. This is a professional tip. Everything received the sharpness because of the detail panel. But then I get a brush. We're going to unpack this concept a little bit more. I'm asking for more clarity, and I paint over my hero in the image. Whatever the focal point ought to be in the image, I do a big, soft, feathered out painting of sharpness. It draws the viewer's attention without them even knowing to the object. Whatever it is. Let's have another look. Every image, I've done that. Every image, I've painted some clarity on my heroes in the image. Now wait a minute. Mom doesn't like that, so I'm going to hold the Alt key and paint it out on her face. That was erase it there. Now I could say, but it was useful on the eyes. I'm zooming. Tiny little brush. Eyes like it. Flesh tone doesn't. I could create a new brush. I just hit the letter N. While I was painting with the adjustment brush, a new N. New brush. And this new brush will be my feminine brush. And I can just run a coating of that over mom's flesh so that when my wife, that's not my wife, but when my wife says, "Oh, honey, did you do anything to that photo?" She accepts one lie from me. One lie is the only lie I'm allowed to tell for life, but I'm allowed to tell it over and over. I do it like this. "Sweetheart, honey, you know you're beautiful. Did I do anything to your photo?" That's an agreement we have, okay? She wants me to make her look like she remembers she looks. It's the one time in our relationship I'm allowed to fib. "Did you do anything to my photo?" "Honey, no, you're beautiful." She smiles, she accepts me, we'll stay married. 35 years and going strong. Woo-hoo-hoo! Lord help me. And pray for her too, because she's going to need it. That's it for sharpening.